Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about securing data access. In particular, we're looking at 5G networks and how they affect secure data access. To discuss that, I'm joined by a major industry expert. With me is Matt Carroll, Chief Executive Officer and founder of Immuta. Matt, very good to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So I know we want to talk about 5G and securing data access, but let's back up a little bit and talk about 5G. Where are we with 5G? There's always this sense like, oh, it's on the way, or maybe it's here, or it's not mainstream quite yet. I mean, what is your sense? I know you're not exactly in that industry, but like, what is your sense of how we are with adopting 5G?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to like any of these rollouts where, mobile device is able to connect at 100 megabits per second. It's a pretty significant change from like, 3 to 5 megabits per second. It's all about hardware rolling it out. And by hardware, I mean the towers and the leases. There's just a lot of red tape, but I would be willing to bet a lot that, over the next 2 years, maybe three, we're going to see just full scale rollout. And we're already seeing like the phone, vendors as well as mobility that is provided within vehicles starting to be 5G capable. So clearly the hardware will be there as soon as the networks roll out. And I would say, like I said, in the next 2 years, this is going to be a critical mass where we'll see more data, more transmission of information than ever before. Everything today is nothing compared to what we're going to see.
Cool. Okay, so we could spend still more time watching YouTube on our phones. Is what I'm hearing there.
Yeah, and I think, but then you have to take it a next step, right? Is augmented reality then could potentially become a reality. The ability to transact. You can imagine your car driving up to McDonald's, and the car itself is a point-to-pay system.
Mm.
I have kids. They're gonna have a PlayStation 5. I just know it in the back of my car somehow. Like it's gaming, entertainment, fintech, insurtech will have. Every car will have video on it to be able to record insurance claims. It's just we're going to see an onslaught of what I would consider high bandwidth IoT devices that are going to be equipped into everything that we do today.
Mm.
It's just been waiting for that compute layer, well, and batteries, right? So the progression of batteries plus the 5G network really creates a whole new world around the IoT kind of augmentation into our life.
Interesting, really interesting. So, all right, let's talk about the relationship between data access control and 5G networks. What are some of the key issues there as you see it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you wouldn't necessarily go talking about from 5G to privacy security on data, but I think the interesting thing, as I just mentioned, how do we do fraud around payment systems? The decision point is this my kid in the back seat? Is it my kid's friend in the back seat that's trying to buy something on the PlayStation Network?
Hmm.
Uh, to what are the ethical responsibilities if I have video cameras? Do I have an expectation of privacy if I have a dashboard cam up on an 18-wheel truck to monitor whether or not that truck was, at fault of a tire snapping and hitting another car or not, right?
Hmm.
What are the expectations of privacy? Who should be able to access that information? How do we log who accessed it? These are all going to be questions that are going to be really complicated because, I mean, if you think about like a Ring doorbell, right? If you have that data goes, I don't know where it goes, but it goes somewhere, and then
Right.
but it can scan all the way to the road. So if someone's doing analysis on that data, which is probably fine, but how do you build in, well, they're actually analyzing the road, not right at your doorstep,
Hmm.
right? So how do we hold folks accountable for that? How do you automate that? Because there'll be just too many people accessing that data. And then the big one where I get really, really excited, not that privacy and ethics isn't incredibly important, but for good, we actually want to share that data for many different reasons.
Hmm.
How do I exchange that data? But there's so much data. There's just should be petabytes upon petabytes of data. How do I effectively share that?
Hmm.
Right. So that's going to be a massive challenge. And there's contractual obligations around that data. So the data contract as to who you can give that data to is going to be really, really, really complicated.
Yeah, I can just see, I can imagine the pages of legalese on that one and the potential lawsuits. But it's a very important issue, and I think it's still in some ways newer ground. So what about governing and sharing sensitive data? I mean, what advice would you give to companies about that?
I think first and foremost is transparency.
Mm,
I think that being forthright, if you hire, we have EULAs, we download an app and we all just kind of scroll through it and accept and move on because we want to leverage the app provides some sort of quality service for us.
sure.
I think the more corporations can be transparent about how the data is being used and why, that purpose can then be tied to the processing, right? So when we talk about data processing agreements, like the GDPR, as an example,
Mhm.
when you build a DPA, a data processing agreement, you're basically pushing down contractual obligations. Hey, when you process this data, or you have a sub-processor, these are the rules to the road, right? You can use this for marketing. You can use it for fraud. If there is a need by the government to process it for a law enforcement case, you are authorized to do that, right? The world we're going to move towards is a blend of consumer rights and corporate need to process the data in order to make money.
Mhm.
And there's going to be a balance and a symbiotic relationship between the two. And the more transparent that is, and the easier it is to read those contracts, the easier it'll be for consumers to buy into it.
You used a new term that I haven't heard that I bet I'm going to hear a lot more of, which is the DPA, the Data Processing Agreement.
Mm.
I assume maybe this is probably not a new term. I just haven't heard it before, but that document feels like it's going to undergo a lot of changes in the years ahead, and the nature of that document is going to be disputed between various different parties.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think this is going to be probably the most complicated aspect of releasing all these capabilities into the world. You could imagine being in a stadium, and they'll have a drone above the stadium that's providing really high quality, collection of video, and there's
Mhm.
going to be all these augmented analytics around it, but they're going to capture faces in the stands. So
Mhm.
when you enter in your ticket, right, which might be digital, but that'll have a data processing agreement saying, hey, if we happen to capture your face in the stands, we may use that for biometrics to determine you are actually who you are in your seats for
Mhm.
like StubHub fraud,
Sure.
right?
Right.
Or we might use that to determine like, hey, you like to go to this type of concert, right?
Right. Right.
There's all these things, and so how we deal with contracts around the data itself and who can use it is just it's going to be fun. It's going to fundamentally change how we think about everything we do.
Well, and I think there's a couple different parties and sub-parties to the contracts, and I think about all the, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, all the pages of, are you okay with this agreement when I've opened up an app and it's like 5 pages of deep legalese, and I just click okay. Who knows what I'm really agreeing to? And I'm sure we all do that. I think so. Consumers have almost been trained like, well, I guess it says a lot of stuff. I'm not going to worry about it because I can't take 45 minutes to read, legal documents. So but then there's that relationship, consumer seller, but then there's going to be business to business, where this seems like there's going to be teams of experts who pour over that and fight about that.
Yeah, I mean, if it look take a look at Nokia, right? They signed a contract with all three cloud providers, right? So the AWS, Azure, and Google. They're moving off of their local infrastructure and investing in cloud compute infrastructure,
Mhm.
not because they don't want to manage hardware. It's because they want access to modern data infrastructure. So, you know, BigQuery, Redshift, Databricks, Snowflake, these vendors are going to be global and be able to operate and crunch this data. And what's interesting is, so the telco vendors are really having to rethink how they actually register users into the system and then track the lineage of these consumers. And so what's happening B2B is, as they move into that data infrastructure to process that data, whether in a data lake or a cloud warehouse, really the big money game is the data exchange. It's this
Mm.
no copy because the data is so big. So I saw this in Baghdad in 2006 when we introduced um, really, fancy drones, right? With all the things, other things we were collecting on our trucks, the sensors we had on the battlefield, we couldn't move terabytes of data over SATCOM. It was
Mm.
like 18 kilobits per second. It was really slow.
It would have
Uh,
taken a long time.
yeah. Oh my God, it would take forever, right? It was
Right.
just like, but I needed to have the information back in 42 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Right? So again, the same thing in 5G is I can't backhaul that data to some tower or to wherever. I need to use distributed cloud infrastructure to process petabytes of data, but I can't make a copy of it. So these data exchanges, both, Snowflake, Databricks, have these data exchanges by which you can process petabytes of data at a fraction of the cost of localized hardware, without having to copy it.
Right.
Point to it. So that's the key thing is then for corporations is think about like when you're on a handset, when you go from tower to tower, you get something called a temporary mobile subscriber identity. And it basically says, hey, this phone has been registered, authenticated on the network. You're good to go across the network, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to see the same thing with processing data where, hey, this is who I am. I have my identity. I'm in the network. It's authorized as a company. And I'm going to hop into, other companies' data. I'm American Express. Well, Lowe's and Home Depot users are going to jump in and be able to share each other's data, right? Because American Express is holding all those transactions. So it's going to dramatically impact company to company, consumer to consumer potentially, and consumer to company, if that makes sense. So basically,
totally. Yeah.
I can see both my data in both companies.
Well, all right, let's talk about Immuta specifically. So how does Immuta play in this market, and what is the Immuta advantage?
Yeah, we've coming from the U.S. intelligence community, so we kind of spun out of the government. Believe it or not,
let me back out. Is that part of your service when you were in like 2006? Was that part of that? Is that relate to that or not necessarily?
No, I mean I learned a lot as an Army officer, and I just saw these things kind of. I mean, we had billions of dollars. So we were just investing in infrastructure.
Sure.
You don't
Right.
see as a 21-year-old kid that didn't know any better,
Cool.
But when you coming out of that, years after that, we started to invest in cloud infrastructure in the government. And one thing was clear: it wasn't about just moving applications onto this new, cheaper infrastructure. It was how do I get access to data faster? The problem was there's like two big problems to that. One is no one knows what the rules to the data are.
Right.
And then two is no one knows who actually owns the data.
There's a gray area there, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, like who actually owns it?
Well, but in what situation? Because say for X company and their HR records, we know who owns X company's HR records. What data are we talking about? Remind what data are we talking about with people?
Well, it could be anything. Remember, like if I'm in a large bank, I bring my own data from the world, right? I analyze social media data about companies we may be investing in.
Right.
We have purchased research data, which we have limited rights to, right? And then I may have internal data that we built and created, and then I may have market data. When I run algorithms against that and merge it all together, what's the rule?
Yeah, right. Okay, that is a brand new area, and I'm not even sure who's going to regulate that, and it's a complicated thing to regulate.
Yeah. So if you think about it, is like let's just say a Mercedes-Benz vehicle.
Sure.
I have OEM parts where from like quality control, I've got to submit that data back to them so that vendor can make their parts better, right? I have all this telemetry with connected to 5G. I have essentially a entertainment experience in the car, right? That I may need to share with iHeartRadio and the PlayStation Network and Google, right? And then I have a whole different set. Then I have Mercedes-Benz. And by the way, Mercedes-Benz has three. They have US, they have Europe, and they have China. So as depending on where that car is and depending on who that consumer is, the rules may change.
Right. Well, okay. If I just to make sure that I get the full Immuta story, if I put a Immuta in a nutshell, what would you say? We do this and this to do this.
Yeah, to back up, what Immuta does, though, it's the least sexy part of this is, we built our platform to be able to allow anyone of any legal / engineering experience to be able to implement policies on regulated data, right? So we're an active control layer natively built into all that cloud compute infrastructure to where you automatically inherit all these policies, all these rules, who can access what, why, when. We can automate all of those decisions in real time.
That is that's a growth area. It's no doubt about it. That is going to be a growth area. I see what you mean. It's not necessarily sexy, but wow, it's going to be hot. I mean, in its own way, it's going to be a major area that people are going to need to spend a lot on and be aware of. No doubt about it. Let's look to the future, because I think people always want to find out where we're going and so they can get ready for it. I mean, what would you say about data handling, data, 5G, secure access? What do you see a couple years down the road that people need to know about?
Yeah, I think there's like two big balloon items that people need to like be focused on, because the hardware and all it's coming. Listen, people want to spend a lot of money on gaming, entertainment, and all the cool things that you can have. It's
Right.
coming. So it's going to come real fast, right?
Right.
The two things that I think that, what I would say are parting words on this is, one is consumer rights around data are going to move really fast, right? To catch
Mm.
up.
Okay.
Because we have the GDPR and CPRA and other data sovereignty laws, you're going to see data locality driving a lot of these consumer rights decisions.
Hmm.
Depending on which state you're in, depending on which country you're in, there's going to be a lot of choices for consumers as all of these devices come out.
Right.
So it's being aware of this. The second is a security vector.
Ah.
Is as we expose this information, that there's all this new treasure trove of information that we could use for good and bad.
Right.
And that means adversaries are going to attack this. It is not a question out there. So looking at user behavior, who's using your data and why, looking at the data itself, is it normal? And then looking at the types of queries that are being operated on it. Are there machines running all these crazy queries that we've never done before? Why is that?
Mm-hmm.
Between state actors and then like what I would consider as, nefarious criminal organization, like
Right.
this is going to be real. It's going to be a new part of our life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think the average consumer or corporation is quite ready for it yet.
Yeah, I think there's a glimpse of it. I think we know there's a threat out there. Maybe we're only now just fully waking up to it. But there's no doubt there's nation states, there's people with a lot of money involved in hacking, and I think we do sense.
Absolutely. I think the more data that's in the cloud, though, the cloud is a new attack vector, right? So predominantly it's someone fishes and gets in, logs into your system. But this type of data that we're going to see predominantly, I mean, there's going to be cases where it is user data, but this is predominantly corporations leveraging the data, right? And so the cloud is a new attack vector to collect all this IoT telemetry and leverage it against these corporations or leverage it against certain consumers. And that's healthcare records. That is how you're operating your day-to-day life. It is like your bank transactions. It's a lot more personal because of the connectivity and the pattern of life around the consumer.
Hmm. It's going to be a fascinating sector to follow, and it's going to be huge, and it's going to be a lot of investment. Matt, thanks so much for sharing your insight today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.